Welcome to the Game of Her Own podcast, a podcast about women who work in sports. I'm your host, Jahaan Blake. After 15 years of working for 3 major league teams, including the Boston Red Sox, Los Angeles Dodgers, and the Chicago Cubs, I discovered the one thing I loved the most was helping women in sports shatter glass ceilings and take their seat at the table. I loved it so much that I made a business out of it. I have the honor of coaching high-performing women in the sports and entertainment industry and supporting them as they go after exactly what they want in their career. So if you are feeling tired of waiting on the sidelines, done being overlooked for promotions, and you're ready to pull ahead of the pack and take your career to the next level, girl, I'm here for it. I also created the Game of Her Own podcast to support you as well. We are here to share the stories of incredible women who work in sports and entertainment. These leaders and trailblazers will inspire you with their success and the lessons they've learned along the way to the top. Ladies, there is nothing like women empowering women. I am so honored you're here. From ball girl to CMO. That's the name of Melissa Proctor's new book. You know, before I read her book, I already thought she was a total boss. A Black woman who is the Executive Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer of the Atlanta Hawks and State Farm Arena. I mean, come on. You guys, when I started my career in sports, I didn't see anyone who looked like me in positions like Melissa's. Trust me, I was looking hard. Representation matters, y'all. And so it makes sense why I was fangirling when I was reading her book and got to know the person behind the powerful executive title. I am so excited for you to hear our conversation. We get into all the things, like I usually do. And of course, she gives incredible advice. She talks about her role as CMO, what keeps her up at night, how she deals with rejection, which I know is hard for all of us. And Melissa talks about the guiding principles she uses to make decisions in her life. I'm sure you noticed by now, but when it comes to the racial awakening that's happening in our country, I like to ask some of my guests to give you advice on how to approach making change in your organizations. And that's because you've told me it's important to you. Listen, nobody has the exact answer. I think we all know that. However, listening to others' perspectives and experiences will help you start or continue the work that needs to be done to bring us closer to racial equality. With that said, Melissa shares her perspective and some advice on how to approach making change in your organizations. All right, ladies, it is time to dive in. I hope you enjoy. So Melissa, welcome to the Game of Her Own podcast. We are honored that you're here.
Thank you. I am honored to be here.
So before we dive in, lots of good stuff. I can't wait to talk about your book, but I want you to take us back into when you first fell in love with sports.
Fell in love with sports. That's such a great question because it is so not a part of my world or childhood growing up. I never played a sport. There were no Corey leagues. I was always an artist, drawing and painting. So technically that was my sport, if it was one. And through elementary school, middle school, I was in Magnet Art School. High school, I went to Magnet Art School. And I had a cousin who was very much into sports and basketball specifically, my cousin Suyen. And we were always, we did dance too, dance class, tap, jazz, street tap. I was all in. But she was the only one who was like, oh man, did you see the game? And I'm like, what game? Don't know what you're talking about. So I would hang out at her house sometimes and we would watch Heat games. And it was like a whole different world to me. And I was never interested in sports, obviously, Super Bowls and baseball were all happening in Miami. I remember the Marlins launched. It was a big deal. Never got into it. And so we started watching the game and she explained it to me. And I realized an entry point for sports is a big deal. A lot of times when people are young and you're playing it, that's kind of your entry point. Or if you've never played, you have a passionate sibling or family member who will help introduce you to the game. So she was truly my introduction to the game of basketball without even really thinking about it. And, we were probably watching some games when the Heat were in the strong 90s. And so there was Alonzo Mourning and Tim Hardaway and, Pat Riley's head coach. And it was good energy around the team. And I started getting into it. And so after watching a couple games and just really wanting to learn more, I became a fan. And truly a fan. And I don't know how fandom happened so quickly, but it was the home team and something to root for, but that was officially it. And then when I was, 15 and I wanted to get a job, my mom was like, what do you want to do? And I was like, watching those games. There are no women on the court. I want to be the first female coach. Like, I didn't say referee. I didn't say, GM. No, it was, I want to be the coach. And she was like, great, go get a job in the NBA. And so, after writing a lot of letters to the Heat and trying to figure out how to get put on, I'd never been to a game in real life, never seen a professional athlete. Like, I had no connection whatsoever. And, cold calling, writing letters and drawing art on the envelopes and on the letters themselves. And when they hit Jay Sable, who was then the equipment manager, and he was like, I don't know what to do. There are no girls here. They're all boys. And, it's grunge work and it's dirty and we mop sweat. We fold towels. We hand out Gatorade. We come hours before the game starts. We leave hours after the game ends. And I was mesmerized. It's like, yeah, that sounds awesome. Let me do it. And it took a while. It was probably like an entire summer of like begging, pleading. And then finally he invited me to a preseason game. And I'll never forget that because I think that was like the moment it all connected. Mm-hmm. I had never been in an arena for a sporting event. So I didn't know like the lights and everything you see on television and how it really looks almost like a TV set, especially before there are fans in the building. And mm-hmm. It was mesmerizing. And I remember going in and I got my little fresh free outfit with my little, was at the time probably Champion or something, was a league partner. And I was like, oh man, I have free Heat gear and I got some sneakers and I have really big feet. So that was a big deal. And I remember walking onto the court. I wear size 11 in women, like no joke. So I walked onto the court and I was just like, wow. And they gave me a mop and said, all right, you're going to go mop up. So I didn't know anything. I didn't know how to rebound. I didn't know anything, but just being able to sit there and see the game with like the best seat in the house on the baseline, like right under the basket was phenomenal. Like I get chills even thinking about it now because it was such an energy rush of like, you don't know what's coming, whether someone's going to dive for a loose ball right in front of you or you got to run and mop up sweat really quick. Like you're always on edge, but seeing it was like magic.
Did you see the Ball Boys on TV before, like when you were watching games with your cousin? Did you know what that was?
Heck no. I didn't even know it existed, like in honesty. And obviously when you're watching a game and more, not so much the ones that are mopping up sweat because they're intentionally hidden. Like sometimes they sit behind the basket or they sit way back, but more the ones that are following the players as they're taking off their sweats or warm-ups and they're behind them picking it up or throwing them towels or giving them Gatorade at timeouts. Like I kind of saw them, but I didn't see that as myself. Like there was never a connection point in my mind of one day I'm going to do that. It was, I'm writing to the organization, I just want a job. And they're like, well, talk about this. I don't even think I actually saw what a ball kid did on the court until I was one.
And that grunge work didn't like mop up sweat, hand out towels, like pass out Gatorade. None of that like deterred. You weren't just like, ooh, I don't want to do any of that. It almost sounded like it made you want it even more. Just like,
well, I didn't have a choice. So based on my mom, if I wanted to get a job and I already laid down the gauntlet, like I want to work in the NBA. And she said, well, that's where you can go. If they told me that was the only job available, if they said, we want you to be a janitor in the arena, I probably would have been like, okay, I'll try it out. Because I didn't know any better. You know what I mean? It's almost like the naivete of being 15 or 16 and, okay, yeah, sure, cool. Because handing out Gatorade to Alonzo Mourning sounded like an awesome thing to do. Mopping up the sweat for Dan Marley, okay, like that it didn't even resonate as grunge work. And I think the side of it of there's no girls, it's all guys, knowing at the time, women weren't allowed in locker rooms then. There were no female referees in the NBA. So there wasn't a precedent set of, well, you can do this or, you can be in this area. It was very much of, this is the man's world. And if you want to do something, you can just kind of stay out here on the court and help out. Mm-hmm. And that's where I was. And I segued that not as a negative, like some of the ball boys kind of showed me the ropes. And I remember the first day, there was a kid named James. He was awesome. Overtown. He just knew the ropes. It was like, he was kind of like, stick with me, kid, you'll go far kind of vibe. And he's like, okay, when the players come out, you say, hey man, can I help you take your bags to your car? Because if you take the bags to the car, then they'll tip you. Or, if there's somebody really want their shoes, you ask them for the shoes before they get off the court. And then, remember you. So then afterwards, you got to position yourself at this part of the arena before they get on the bus so that you can get to shoot. Like, there was
strategic, yes.
A lot of it. And so I was not that savvy, but Dennis Rodman was one of my favorite players at the time. And so I drew a picture for him actually in school. Like, it was when his book came out and he loved Pearl Jam and all these things. And when he was in the wedding dress, all of that. I was a huge fan. My Air Worms stickers. And so I drew this picture and I had it rolled up and I gave it to him and he put it in his purple backpack and said, I'm going to put this up in my house in Chicago. And I was like, oh my gosh, Dennis Rodman.
Oh my God.
It was phenomenal to me at the time, but it was fun. It didn't seem like work at all. And I think the beauty of it for me and being on the court was I got a chance to really understand the game. Stan Van Gundy was an assistant coach with the Heat at the time. And he would be like, hey, Melissa, come help me with these drills. And so he's like, pass and then stand there. So I was literally a part of, game prep on game days, which was, for someone who didn't understand the game, I learned everything. Mm-hmm. And then Pat Riley, as a head coach at the time, he had this notebook with these blue pieces of paper. And he would draw every play on it. So it was like, I don't know, it was pre-dry erase boards, but it was very much of like pen and paper. And so he would call the plays and then crumple up the paper and throw them under the bench. And I remember collecting at the end of the game all the pieces of paper and like building a notebook of plays. I had no idea what I was even looking at. But I just felt like it was so important because Pat Riley wrote it, at a critical part of the game. That was like, the awesomest memories and totally being in love with the sport from that time.
Now, I'm going to ask a silly question here. Was your cousin a little jealous? Here she was, a big fan, and then you brought her she brought you into this. She introduced you to the world of basketball, and then here you are, Dennis Rodman. Here's a picture, Pat Riley's, plays and creating your own playbook.
No, I don't think she was. I don't think we've ever discussed it in that way either. But, way more pride. She was a little older than me, so she graduated.
Okay.
But it was still the passion of like, man, do you believe this? Like, I don't believe this. This is crazy.
Oh, what a supportive family. Okay, I love it. Tell everybody what you do now and who you do it for.
Absolutely. So I'm currently the Executive Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer for the Atlanta Hawks and State Farm Arena here in Atlanta, Georgia. And that is a long title and a lot of responsibility as being a part of our senior leadership team and really helping to drive demand for our brand. Overall, at the core, that's what we do, and really connecting back to the community. But, day to day, currently I'm running advertising and promotion, our social digital teams. That also extends to partnering with our head of PR and brand communications, which is a lot like CorpCom in some worlds. Also, we have an internal agency we call Hawk Studios, which is all of our amazing video content and graphics work. So the look and feel of all of our campaigns and designs is mainly done in-house. We don't really operate with any big agency of record. And so we built that up from the ground, I'm really, really proud of that work. In addition, we also manage our own retail shop internally. So e-tail and our stores in Arena. And so we have an amazing brand merchandising team that does that. In the last year or so, I've also grown oversight of our community CSR initiatives. And as an organization, we have an owner that really believes that the Atlanta Hawks organization is a community asset. And so especially during the pandemic and shutdown, we've been doing a ton of work on the community side. In addition to basketball programs and our camps and clinics, we were running physical camps every summer and, tournaments throughout the city and the state. And honestly, within the pandemic, we were shut down to what are we going to do? We wanted to continue to have these clinics, but it wasn't safe. And so we've developed this Hawks at Home platform now, which is 100% virtual, where kids can learn the fundamentals of basketball and also other things just to make them better people. And we're super proud of that work. And then obviously game day is the biggest piece of our business if we were coming to a game. And so our live production and kind of live brand experience is a big part of what we do as well. So everything from what you see on the center hung and all the content in the arena, the experience when you're there, from a mascot, dance teams, all of our entertainment groups, that's great. And then we translate that brand work out into the community as well. So if that's showing up at a festival or a parade and seeing the Atlanta Hawks brand experience out in the community, we're also responsible for that. So it's a good team, pretty broad in scope, but at the end of the day, we all work together and kind of that alignment and collaboration on tightening up our brand and elevating it in the community is what we're all about.
Okay. So clearly you have a big job. I know people are listening being like, whoa, like that's a lot of stuff to oversee. So I'm going to steal a question that I read in your book, which is, you asked this to somebody, but what keeps you up at night?
Well, it's a good question. And I think these days it's changing every day. The shooting of Jacob Blake and knowing what's happening in our world from like a social justice perspective and how divided our nation is keeps me up every night. I have a young daughter and I'm like, what kind of world is she going to live in? And I'm looking at these ads on television. And as a team, we've been very focused on trying to ensure that we can help get people out to vote. And not in completely nonpartisan, like vote for who you want to, but exercise your right. And so even opening up our arena, we're the first team in the league to do that and becoming the largest voting precinct in Georgia for early voting for these upcoming elections. Like that's a big part of what we're focused on right now. And so a lot of what keeps me up is like, are we making the right decisions? How are we responding? Like what should we be doing as an organization? What more can we be doing to help our community, but also, help our people? That's important. And I think, from a day-to-day standpoint, we are in the live event business, indoor live events. So within a global pandemic, indoor live events is not where it's at right now. So how our business evolves for the future is something that a lot of people have been looking at. I think the NBA's done a tremendous job in the bubble of being able to engage fans and having the virtual fan and, creating an environment where, playoffs are happening and people are still in playoff mode. And that's great. The energy is still there while still being a voice for players and providing platforms for people to educate. So doing all those things is important, but what that looks like at a local level for teams, there's still a lot of unknowns. So I think that's keeping a lot of people up at night, just not knowing, when we're on the other side of this pandemic, when there's going to be comfort in going to a live event and having people all around, and how does that experience evolve based on what's happened in the world. It's not going to be exactly the same as it was because it can't be. So the next evolution of that, we're consistently working on discovering.
That would keep me up at night as well. Talk a little bit. I'm thinking COVID, obviously it's not going away anytime soon, unfortunately. How are you keeping your team motivated through all of this?
I have a fantastic leadership team. They are all amazing people, very strong personalities, incredibly talented in their areas of expertise. And so I feel like my job is to create the platform, kind of provide the strategy sometimes, or just get out the way and let them do their thing. But everyone needs different things, especially at this time. And so the one thing that I do, hopefully to motivate them, but really just create space, give them the opportunity to share and talk with each other. We just did a social distancing meetup earlier this week at Piedmont Park, at a local park. And so much of that was because they missed each other. We haven't really been all in the same place since March. And so being able to connect, even just informally for an hour, people brought their kids out, like it was great. But it's really just as much as I can, letting them know that, we're all in it together. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to be on all day. We don't have to try to create projects to look busy. Yourself and your personal health and your family, that comes first. And I'm very much about family first. And so, sometimes if you're having a hard time, I'll say, take some time. Like, It's okay. And I think just having some grace with people right now, especially where we are in the world, is really important. And so in terms of motivating, it's allowing them to be authentically whatever they need to be at that time, but then also having a little bit of excitement about the future, because even though there's a lot of unknowns, the opportunities in that are endless. So as much as we want to be a cutting edge, competitive, next level team, now is when that work happens. And so it's also thinking of the future. Let's look at things in a different way. Let's not do what we've always done for the draft or draft lottery. How do we shake things up a bit? And so I also think by kind of pushing people out of their comfort zones and giving the flexibility and freedom to think in new ways with no budget, it provides an interesting challenge that, hopefully will keep people engaged through this time.
Keywords there for me were growth and grace. So, we're in a time where there's so much uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen, but you're also allowing your team to grow, but giving them some grace while they're trying to do it. Because when you look around, I feel like everyone's doing something new that they've never done before, right? You're using a muscle that you never flexed. And that's not easy. That's not easy to do
in any context. But if you're doing it and you're homeschooling and you're not able to leave the four walls in your home, like that added pressure makes everything 10 times harder.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And what would you say prepared you? I feel like this could be a big question, right? But what prepared you for this role that you're in now?
What prepared me for this role? I almost feel like the way that my career and life has unfolded, everything has prepared me for the next thing, whether I knew it or not. And so I really believe that God has kind of directed my steps in this way, where all of the lessons that I've had from being a ball kid, honestly, to, my time at Turner Broadcasting, through getting laid off, then being 8 months pregnant and trying to just figure it out, to ultimately where I am now. Each of those pieces were a stepping stone that kind of helped prepare me for the next level or next step on the journey. And so I don't think there's any one particular thing, but I will say that, with this position with senior leadership, there's a lot of kind of what got you here won't get you there. I remember reading this book a while back. It was called like Nice Girls Don't Get the Corner Office. And I was very, very junior then, but it talked a lot around how the things that you've done at certain points in your career, like I stayed really late and I finished a project early and I did these things and I put my head down and I worked, aren't necessarily the same skill sets that you would need in order to grow as a thought leader, as a senior leader. Some of that is networking, relationship building, all those sorts of things. And so, I look at that as it relates to my career. I'm like, wow, I really had to understand how every single person that's around that court is integral for a game to happen. And by understanding how to deal with the most difficult of people to the sweetest of people, from the junior level to the ownership, as a ball kid, is exactly what I'm doing now as a CMO.
Yes.
There's no difference. Yes. And some people are like, how is that even the same? And I'm like, you'll be surprised, because I could go back. I went to the American Airlines Arena maybe a year or two ago for a game. And literally there were security guards who used to work the games when I was in high school who were still there. And they saw me and they were like, oh my gosh, I remember you. You were so sweet. You were so, and it's the awesomest feeling, because I'm like, hey, those are my homies. Like, I remember them. And, the connection that we made however many years ago. But people don't forget how you made them feel, and that's important. And so I carried that with me then, and I carry that with me now.
Yes, I love that. And it's really interesting that you say like what you learned and what you were doing when you were a ball girl, and how you were, your philosophies then are the same things now, and the same way you treat people, the same way you did when you were trying to make it. I'm doing air quotes for everybody, but when you're trying to make it, you're doing the same exact things now. Right.
Yeah. And in my mind, there's no such thing as making it. When you make it, you die. People are like, oh, well, the one thing I say in my book is like, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I've never known. I was like, I kind of want a job in the NBA. I want to coach. I've never coached. I could never be a coach in that way. But I don't have an end goal. People are like, so what's next for you? And I'm like, I don't know. We'll see kind of where the journey takes me. I created these guiding principles for my life and my career, which have been very important, for me as I've kind of grown and evolved, and it continues to be. But I allow those things to kind of lead me instead of being title driven or money driven or company driven. And I remember when I got the CMO position, my boss and I, we had this conversation. I sat down, my boss is the CEO, and, he's like, I want you to run marketing. And I said, oh, okay. He's like, I want you to be CMO. And, he's like, do you know why? And I was like, no. He's like, because you don't want it. And I was like, that's interesting. And so my goal has always been like, I just want to make dope shit. That's what I would say. Like, whatever it is, we're going to make, it's going to be awesome. We're all going to get it together. It's going to be amazing. But that's my passion. The passion is in doing the work. And so he's like, you don't normally find that, because a lot of times, I meet so many people who are like, I want to be a CMO. They have no idea why. The title CMO is different based on every organization. There is no through line of what that even looks like. And I would say, well, why do you want to do that? Because I want to lead strategy. I said, you can lead strategy without being a CMO, but some of it is the perception of what a title means, and the perception of what salary comes with that title, or what power or influence may come with that title. And often you don't even need the title to do that, or that's not even the case. And so I'm incredibly grateful and thankful to be where I am. But at the same time, like, that was never my goal.
Your goal, you want to make dope shit.
That's it.
Which I love that quote. So thinking about that, like, were you worried or were you thinking, what else were you thinking about? 'Cause, okay, I get it. You want to make dope shit, but were you like, but I also want, compensation for my dope shit that I'm making?
Those are my guiding principles. And so I'll share them with you. And years ago, I had a mentor that kind of told me, she's like, as you think about your life and your career and decisions, like, what are your filters? Like, what are you using to help make those decisions? And sometimes, you see a job description and you're all in. You don't ask the right questions. You don't think of the right things based on your values. If you're interviewing for a job, you're also interviewing them too, to decide if that's the right place for you. And many people forget that because they're just all like, I just want this. And so for me, I developed these guiding principles years ago, and they still hold true. And so the first one for me is, I need to be in a role where I can be both creative and strategic. I've been in creative roles for creative sake. They didn't fill my cup. I need to also be thinking strategically about the stuff that we were doing. So putting those things together is my sweet spot. The other is I need to add new tools to my personal toolbox. I look at it as if I'm an agency of one person, what new capabilities am I adding to my capabilities presentation? Because if I can do this job in my sleep and I'm not learning anything, it's not the job for me. I get bored super easily. So I know that about myself. Mm-hmm. The third is I need to make enough money to pay my bills on time or ahead. And since I've had my daughter, I now also want to be able to invest in her future. And when I was growing up, my mom was horrible with money, horrible. Bill collectors calling all the time. And I said, I don't want to live that life. I don't want people calling me wanting to know why I haven't done certain things. And so whatever the role or job is, I need to be able to fulfill that because that's important. The fourth one is some sort of work-life harmony. People say work-life balance, but I am not going to sit at my desk until 7 p.m. because the boss is in their office and they need to see me there to make them feel better if we're not being productive. If my daughter has a dance recital at 4:00 on a Tuesday and I got to go, I need the flexibility to be able to go. But know that when I am here, I am dedicated 150%. I'm all in. But being able to have that balance and flexibility, if I need to travel or do things and I put my family first, that's important. So having alignment around that value wherever I go is critical. Mm-hmm. And the final one for me is I am who I am. I bring my entire self to work every day. I have locks. I have a nose ring. I'm a Black woman. I'm very proud of that. I have West Indian heritage. I will rep it at every opportunity. And so that is who I am. And if I am asked to wear a pantsuit every day or I need to cut my hair for some reason, that's not the environment I need to be in. And so I want to be able to go in a place and be authentically me and allow other people to be authentically themselves. And so those are my 5 core guiding principles. I stand on them. They work for me. And so any opportunity that comes my way, that's what we're talking about. And even if it's in an interview, it very well may be like, hey, Melissa, would you want to be the CEO? I've gotten that question a ton. Would you be CEO of a team? I said, I absolutely will if they lined up with my guiding principles. Yeah. If someone said, hey, I'm sorry, yeah, we'd love you to be CEO, but we need you here every day. You're traveling every day and you couldn't be with your kid. Then it's not my job. Or if you wanted me to do it, I can't do it in that way. But if you allow me to do it in this way, then we can have a conversation. And I think that helps put so many things on the table that traditionally won't come up until a situation creates it, where you're just able to have other people, you manage other people's expectations and manage your own at the same time.
Right. So the guiding principles, those are great. Those help keep you honest with yourself. Hey, Jahaan here. I hope you're enjoying the interview. I'm sure you are thinking about your own career right now and how you can pull out in front of the pack to take your career to the next level. For 18 years, supporting women in sports has been my favorite part of my career, and I would love to support you. Whether it's joining my free Game of Her Own community or one of my one-on-one coaching programs, I am here for you. Send me a message at jblake@jahaanblake.com or DM me on Instagram at jahaanblake, and let's schedule a time to have a free session. I cannot wait to hear from you. All right, let's get back to why you're here. What was that exercise like? So if someone's listening, they're like, you know what? I need some guiding principles too. So what was that exercise like? Did you just kind of sit down and spill them all out? Did they evolve over time?
It definitely evolved over time. Because I think initially you have to have the experience to know what it is you do and don't want. Yes. I've had a lot of experiences at this point in my career. At one point, I was in a creative job and I was an artist and I loved creative. But I was told like, hey, your job is just to create all the time. And I was like, but what about this idea? Like, no, don't think about it. Just do this because I'm telling you to do it. I knew that wasn't my job. So being creative and strategic came from that. I was asked to do a role where it was the same role as I had before. And I took it. And I was like, I feel like I'm here, like I'm kind of leveling out. I didn't get anything new from this. So I've decided that in order for me to build my skill set, I have to be adding something new. So that came from there. My experience in life, not making any money. When I started out in my career, I was an intern, and that was great for where it was. Doesn't mean I haven't taken roles that haven't paid as much or taken steps backward, because it really depends on the opportunity. But if someone said, hey, I want you to come and work for me for a quarter of what you're making now, I'd say, well, can I pay my bills on time? Am I investing in the future for my daughter? Probably not. So I may have to decline that. Doesn't mean that I'm not willing to take a step backwards, but it's really understanding at what end. If they say, hey, I'm willing to give you a ton of stock in this company, that's a different conversation, because that may be an investment in my daughter's future. So there are nuances to all of it, work-life balance and harmony. My mother was disabled for most of my adult life. When I started college, she went out on disability from her job. And so even as a very young executive, like first starting out my career, I had to go to Florida. She had a stroke. I had to help take care of her. And so, I had to ask my boss at the time for grace. Hey, I need to go for like a month to go help my mom and move her in a new assisted living facility. And I'd still work. I can be here. I can join meetings. And they gave me the ability to do that. And I realized how important that was, that I was still able to work. And then when I came back, I had a job that was so critical at that stage in my life. And so that becoming a guiding principle early, I never took for granted the value of being willing to work with someone who understood that balance or that need, because some people don't.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Thanks for sharing. All right, let's take a step back. You said something and you kind of glossed over it, but I'm shocked. I read it in the book too, but you're 8 months pregnant and then you get laid off. How did you not panic? So I'm reading the book. It just seemed like you were like, all right, what am I going to do now? Like panic didn't come across in the words that you put down. So how did you manage that?
So at the time I was married, and, my husband at the time and I were like, well, I had severance. So let's say severance is helpful. Okay. So if you know that you're going to get at least a couple weeks, enough time for you to figure out your life. I had insurance for that time as well. So all of that was, I can't say comforting, but honestly, truthfully, and even going back and thinking of it now, I've only been pregnant once. I have one daughter. That journey in itself, by the time you get to 8 months and you're a house walking around, like, I can't be bothered with anything else. I'm just trying to make it through the day. And so for this startup that I'm working on, which was awesome opportunity, still stressful, but a lot of learning to say, hey, you know what? The company's going to cut the whole business unit. It wasn't, hey, Melissa, it was the entire business that you're working on is no longer going to be a part of this organization. There are some people who are like, you started here as an intern, you're a VP, they can't do that to you. Like, it wasn't personal, and that's also something I've learned career-wise over time. Business is business. And it's never, rarely ever is it personal. It's just, this is how it is. So there was no choice in the matter. There's no fighting this. There's not you can't do this. And so my focus very quickly shifted from, okay, I'm going to, figure out how to get my team prepared, when I have this baby, to then come back to, okay, we're going to disband this team and we're all going to figure out next steps. And I'll try to get as many of the people on my team in positions in other places as I can, because I also wanted to help them. But my focus is on this kid, and it was going to be that way anyway, regardless. So it was almost a blessing in disguise, because at the end of the day, I was going to have to change my focus regardless. It just helped me shift from trying to be in two places. Now I can just be here and do that. And then afterwards, we'll figure out the next step. And, the interesting part, and I think I did write about it in my book, was that my boss now from the Hawks, the CEO, was previously at Turner. And, I ran into him at his party. We talked about it, and I ended up coming on and consulting with the Hawks on building a brand. But, about 4 or 5 months later, I ended up coming on board as a VP of brand strategy for the Hawks. And I didn't realize that when he left Turner, he had a clause, that said he couldn't poach talent from the company, which means if I was still working at Turner, there's no way I could have come to work for the Hawks at that time, just based on how the world works. So being laid off was the biggest blessing in many ways. And so many times you don't see it. So for me, instead of the fear and anxiety of like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I'm like, this is happening for a reason. The reason is going to come whenever it needs to. So in the interim, let me just focus on what I absolutely have to and what's in front of me, which is my daughter. And that was it. I mean, it's less of I've been through a lot of other things in my life, going through a hurricane and living in there's so many other challenges. Like, work's going to be okay. We'll be all right.
Right. It'll still be there. Something's going to come.
Something.
I love that. I love that attitude and outlook on life. And in your book, you kind of go that way. Like you heard no sometimes.
Heard a ton of no's.
Yeah.
Ton of no's.
But it didn't, it almost seemed like it never flattened you. It almost fueled you to do better things. Right. That's how I took it.
Yeah, I feel like they're lessons, I mean, and even in hearing no's, like, what did you get from it? You went through the experience. If it was an interview for something, okay, what did you learn through that process? Why did you get the no? What do you need to work on? Or that no may have happened, just like that no came from Turner in order to create this opportunity that I'm currently in. So it's so hard in that moment, especially if it's something you really wanted, which I've had happen a ton of times as well. But yeah, I think faith is an important thing for me. And other people may have different ways that they, view the world, but I really believe that everything happens for a reason.
Take us back. My mind goes all over the place, and I think my listeners are starting to get used to how I ask questions. So let's go back to your role as CMO and talk a little bit about you are a change agent. I know you just were named 40 under 40, correct, for Business Sports Journal. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So you're out there making change. You're a change agent. What's your approach to get alignment around those big things that you're trying to do?
Internally, within the organization, if there are big ideas and things that we want, I mean, I'm grateful to be in an organization where, my relationship with my manager is a strong one where I can share ideas and things that I'd like to do. My relationship with our ownership team is strong as well. So if I have an idea and I can pitch it to them and explain the strategic rationale around it, a lot of times there's and if there's a no, there's still a willingness to have a conversation around that. Uh-huh. So I think for me, it's understanding context of the world and kind of the situation that we're in, and really working to ensure that I've had every pre-conversation with the different stakeholders that may be necessary to understand their POV. Because I think a lot of times my pet peeve is bulls in China shops who come and say, I'm doing this way just because. And people are like, oh, there's no savvy in that. You didn't even try. Over time, I've learned, relationships are really important, and building strong relationships. And you want to build trust, especially, within a team, within my leadership team. Like, we really work hard on that and being transparent as possible and trying to be clear and direct and not necessarily tap dancing and beating around the bush. So I think all those things are important in terms of kind of gaining alignment to, push ideas in a particular direction. And sometimes things come down by force. It'll be like, hey, we're doing this because we have to. Right. And there's understanding around that too. But the transparency of telling me that is equally as appreciated.
So you're clear, direct, socializing your ideas, getting other people's point of view on them before you just press go. And then when you do have to just press go, being transparent about that and just why. Mm-hmm. And I think it's great for people to hear those mid-level, managers who are trying to, like, their step away from executive. I think it's important for them to know and hear what you just said is, it doesn't matter what your title is. You still have to sort of work on creating that alignment. Just because you're the CMO doesn't mean you're going to come in every single day and tell everybody in the organization what you're doing.
No, not at all. And I do think it's important. And as a lot of folks do kind of have that idea of like, oh, just the boss, just do it.
Yes.
But I really believe that good ideas can come from anywhere. And I challenge my team. I say, steel sharpens steel. I don't know everything. There's no one who knows everything. We have subject matter experts, but there's also context for some things that are important. And sometimes people don't take the time to explain the context or want to understand the why. And I think as long as we can be aligned on understanding the why, and then we build a plan or an idea or whatever around it, it's helpful. Because if the answer is no, they can understand why it's no. Just not for, folks to feel dejected or like, I pitched my idea and no one liked it and this place sucks. I'm like, well, do you understand why they said no? They just didn't like it. Let's understand the why, you know what I mean? And so I feel like so many times people are either afraid to ask questions. And I find a lot of that of like, well, I didn't want to ask because I said, no, you got to be willing to. You got to have that confidence and just in knowing. And it's not always easy, and I think over time, the more you practice it in different scenarios with peers or whichever, it only makes you stronger and better.
Yes, I always say, I'm like, just do it once. And I promise you the next time you do it, it's just going to be a little bit easier and a little bit easier. And it's okay to ask questions to someone, in a power position. I don't know why I called it that, but just, they actually respect you more for asking those questions. And it's more through a lens of learning and just trying to understand where they're coming from, right? Versus like challenging them, right? You can't challenge them until you understand where they're coming from. And then maybe it's not your job to challenge them. Maybe it's, the CMO's job.
and you know what, it's funny because I encourage all of the people on my team. I said, you set up time with the CEO, have a conversation with my boss. I mean, and some people are very much about hierarchy. I am not. I say, look, I learned as an intern by setting up an informational meeting with the then president of the network, who is now my boss. That was I was an intern at Turner, years ago. And that's where I started building out relationship, not even thinking of what I was doing was much more, hey, I'm an intern and I want to understand how what you do impacts what I do. That was a question I asked him. And he was like, wow, kid, you got a lot of balls coming in here asking me, this question, and not in a bad way. But from there, I definitely think there was a mutual respect formed and I was curious.
Yes. So it's okay to ask the questions. It's okay to get in there and have that meeting.
Heck yeah.
It's got to come from a place of, I'm not looking for a job, right? I'm not going into the CEO's office to get the next full-time job. It's really about truly wanting to know who that person is and build a relationship. And it's for you, like a perfect example, it's a long-term relationship.
Yeah.
From intern to see like CMO, like that's a long time. But you didn't go in there like what I need I want a full-time position by this date. Can you help me? No.
And it was never an intentional, like, I know this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to figure this out. And in my book, I write about it and I talk a lot about it. I was like, you have to be an asset to people, not a liability of their time. And even in that meeting, I was like, hey, what can I do? How can I help? And I came up with this idea to build I think it was a magazine for TNT, because they didn't really have a consumer touch point where people could understand the network and what they were about. And I called it DNA because drama's in everyone. I mean, I'm like right out of college. And I worked with our creative team and our web team and, some writers, and I mocked up ads, and I had, creative on shows that we were launching on the network. And I gave it to the CEO, then the president of the network. And I said, hey, I'm an intern, came up with this idea, wanted to share it with you. And he's like, this is brilliant. From a business perspective, it's horrible. We would never launch it because magazines won't make money, but I applaud your creativity.
Yes.
And the blending of, the idea of marketing and brand values that you've meshed in here in order to provide something new and unique for our consumers. And so that level of respect and knowing that the thought was in the right place, but I didn't have the experience to know magazines weren't necessarily incredibly profitable or may not be based on our business. But there was something in it that he saw, and it was taking that leap and that effort and that time, because that wasn't a job. No one gave me that as a project. I created that myself. And one of the other things that I learned super early on, one of the gentlemen who worked at TNT and then he went over to CNN, Scott Saffon, amazing marketer. And he literally said, my first day as an intern, he was like, what do you want to be famous for? He's like, I ask every intern as soon as they come in, think of something you want to be famous for, because everyone can come in here and fulfill the job description. You can come here, check every box, get the job done, come in every day, leave, and we would be none the different. We wouldn't even know. We could just bring on the next intern to do the same thing. The people who stand out, leave a legacy, figure out what it is you want to be famous for. What are you going to leave to make people remember you? And it stuck with me. And that's not just intern, but that's any job you have. Like, what is your key differentiator? What's making you stand apart?
Yes. So what I love is he said, I believe it was the CEO, he said this is great, but it's horrible from a business perspective. And just by learning a lot about you through the book and this time together, I'm sure you heard that as a lesson. Like that was a huge lesson right there. Oh, I didn't know that about magazines. Instead of putting your head down and being defeated, right? Like for not delivering the next best thing for TNT, you saw it as a lesson.
For sure. And I was really proud of the work that I created and the fact that he knows who I am. And I really believe that experience led me to this job, because when it came time to build a brand, I was also a ball girl on the court for the Hawks my first year as an intern, mopping up sweat on the court. And they were all girls. That was awesome when I was a ball girl for the Hawks. And he had courtside seats. He would see me every game, mopping up sweat on the court while I was also an intern in the office. It was also the year the All-Star game happened to be in Atlanta. And his son was an honorary ball kid. And he's like, hey, look after my kid. And I'm like, okay. And I knew none the difference. And after that, I made my magazine. I shared it with him. So he knew my passion for basketball. He knew my ability as a brander from that magazine that I had created. Then fast forward 20 years, I'm laid off and I go to an event at the arena and he leaves Turner and goes to be CEO of the Hawks, none of which I would have known then. And he's like, hey, you were awesome, worked on a brand strategy project. He was the highest person on the project. I was the lowest one on the totem pole of rebranding Court TV to True TV, and remembered my work while at Turner through that project and said, hey, I know you love basketball. Remember when you were a ball kid mopping up that sweat? I need help building a brand. Would you be willing to help and sit in on some creative meetings? And I was like, sure. What started as sitting in on a couple meetings and consulting has evolved to today. None of that was written, but I truly believe you set the groundwork in every interaction that you have.
Yes, I agree. Okay, I want to switch gears and get your advice, your thoughts on this racial awakening that we're having in our country. And there's a lot of folks who they want to make change, right? Who work, women who, I'm specifically talking about women who work in sports, and they want to make change within their organization. And it's a huge task, right? Like they know they want to do it. And I have this monthly, cocktail hour with women in sports, and we talk about it a lot. And people are just trying to figure out, what do I do? Where do I start? Who do I go to? And just love to hear your thoughts on some advice for how to approach it.
That's a great question. And I feel like I'm learning more every day, and when we talk even with Coach Pierce, it's like so much of right now is learning, because we think like, oh, okay, we know everything. There's so much that we don't know. Every organization is different. Every league is different. Every team is different. And so, what some teams may have is business resource groups and opportunities for people to come in and really help participate. Other teams may not have. The one thing that I pride myself on and I really think of is I am an example just in existing. And some people take that for granted. And so being a woman that works in sports, you have the opportunity to educate other people interested in careers in sports, other people of color, whether it's through your skill set and whatever it is you do. But by just being there either as a resource, as a mentor to open doors for others, like that in itself is huge and hugely impactful. And I think some folks are like, we need to go, do the protests. And some people that's their thing. And I advocate for whatever makes you feel as if you're making a difference. But I know from personal experience, even, being asked to come here and speak, with you today, like that brings me joy and fills me up, because hopefully there's someone who's listening to this and it's like, oh my gosh, if she can do it, I can do it. And I would say, absolutely, come on board. Here are the resources. Here are the things that I did. Even in writing my book, so much of that is just being able to help open other people's eyes. And sometimes not people of color. The number of times I've told this story about me going to our arena here in Atlanta, and we have a reserved parking space for players and coaches and executives park on game days. And I would get in my car and I would drive and I would park there. And security would look at me and say, I'm sorry, ma'am, the space is reserved for executives. And I would get it so often when I first started. And every time I got it, I would be so happy. And they were like, and people would be like, oh my God, why would that make you happy? I would be so offended. Do they not know who you are? And I'm saying, no, all it's doing is opening their eyes to the idea of what an executive for a sports team can look like.
Wow, I just got the chills. That's good. Yes.
And I am personally get fulfillment out of that, because simply in me being and existing makes a difference. And so being able to open up people's eyes multiple directions. I remember I spoke somewhere maybe a year ago, and it was for an agency locally. I walked in the room, almost no one looked like me, which was fine, about 250 people. And I was a keynote speaker that evening. And so I got there, spoke to the person I needed to organize. I got up and I gave my presentation. By the end, they were all, oh my goodness, you're a Demon Deacon, go Deeks. It was crazy, the shift. And I'm like, there was no respect until you knew who I was and what I did. But by me just being Melissa, who you don't know, Joe Schmo walking in the room, I wasn't important enough. Mm. And those things are differences. But I truly believe, like, on a small scale, that transcends to where we are in the world. Is more people that we can educate to differences and difference in what that means, and bias and things that you don't even think about, or conversations that you have, and creating safe spaces for people to have conversations with you, to be like, so how do you really feel when people touch your hair? I mean, some people are like, is this yours? Oh my God, is that weave? No, they're locks. I've been growing them for quite some time. It's education. And in some ways people can get offended, but I've learned over time, if someone wants to free themselves of their ignorance, I'll at least assist. You know what I mean? Like, I can't look at that and be mad, but everyone is different and everyone reacts differently. We're trying to figure out how should we respond as an organization to certain things? What, can we and can't we do? We have players who have their own voices. And so being able to magnify those. And so depending on any woman's role within their organization, I think there's a space for everyone, but simply in existing, you have an opportunity to make a difference. And if you're a person of color, speak up. That's all I can say is speak up. Don't sit on the sidelines.
Oh, that's perfect. I was just going to ask that question. So that's perfect. Speak up if you are a person of color. It can be intimidating. And I'm speaking from experience. It could be intimidating. It can be, I remember one time I was going to speak up about something, and this heat, like literally, I was junior in my career, heat came over my body. It was like, don't do it. And I didn't do it. But the fact that I still remember that moment today, it's regret, right? And so when I finally did start to speak up again, it got easier every single time.
Yeah. And I've spoken with people. I think it was different pre-pandemic, pre-George Floyd, because there are times where I feel the same, where it's like, I'm tired of talking. So there could be so how do you feel about it? I just want to check in on you. I'm tired of having those conversations too. It's a challenge because, yes, for sure, if there's something you're passionate about, don't feel like you can't use your voice. But at the same time, right now, especially, there's a little bit of apathy, wouldn't be the right word, but how many times can we say the same things? And if I turn on the news, the exact same things are happening. Like, there's a lot of work to be done. And so I think there are a lot of organizations that are doing things, varying degrees of impact or importance or whichever. But, so much of it is just understanding. And I just, I pray just for more understanding in this world, because we're incredibly divided right now.
We are. And the one thing I like, not the division, but is all the conversations that people are having, and everyone's starting to talk. And I feel like when I think back to that moment at that table with this woman who said something, and I will never forget it. But then nobody was having those conversations. I didn't feel like I had support. I think I was still part-time at, when I first, like my first job in sports. And I'm like, oh, if I say something, I'm never going to make it. I'm going to get fired. I just got to put my head down and get my work done. But if that conversation happened today, and that moment happened today with everybody talking, like, I would almost feel like supported, this invisible support in the room with me at that moment. So yes, like you said, person of color right now, speak up. Like, we need you. All right. Tell us about your book, which I had the pleasure of reading. Tell us a little bit about it and the why behind it.
Sure. Well, I wrote my first book. It's out officially September 14th, and it's called From Ball Girl to CMO. And it initially started as a blog some years ago, and it was very much, me trying to put down parts of my story for my daughter. My mom passed away before my daughter was born, which is weird because she always asked me if she wants to meet her grandma. And I was like, that's weird. I've never met her before. She's like, no, she tells me she misses her. I'm like, how did you miss her? You miss, she's like, I want to see her. I miss her. I'm like, but you've never met her. I really believe my mom is in my child. Like, she came back again. But I wanted to tell her my story. And so I started writing a blog. And every time I've spoken, people were like, when are you going to write a book? You should write a book. You should write a book. And it was one of those things that was like, that may be cool. I started this blog and I kind of saw that as the beginnings of what could be a book. And then a chance meeting with a local entrepreneur. And he's like, hey, you mentioned writing a book. I know this woman who's a publisher. She has her own publishing company. We should all go to lunch sometime. I was like, okay. And so we went to lunch maybe 2 years ago. This woman named Renita Bryant from a local company called Mind Matters Publishing. And she was phenomenal. And she's published a lot of books written by women and people of color that just wants to tell our stories. and started working with her on it. And, she took on my project and we worked together, and I said, I'm going to write a chapter every 2 weeks. And she's like, okay, well, here's your timeline. And a whole year passed, and I think I wrote one chapter. And I just knew that wasn't the way it was going to work. And she's like, look, we can help you a little bit more. If you do need some assistance writing and doing some interviews and really helping to get the story out of you. And so I began working with her more in that way. And it was time. And I was obviously very busy and being a mom. And so the pandemic helped me slow down enough to kind of finish the project. And I've been working on it so long, I didn't even realize when I finished. And then one day she was like, great, you just approved the last thing, we're done. And I was like, wait, what? We're done. She's like, what do you want your release date to be? And I'm like, wait, what? Time out. And so I learned a ton about the writing process, the publishing process. But, I honestly just wrote it as, a resource for people interested in sports, for women of color, for people in general. And then it's a little bit of a memoir, a little bit of a business book, a little self-help, and kind of a combination of all. But it's truly just my journey and being able to share that in as much of an authentic way as possible, ultimately for my daughter, but everyone else who benefits just makes the journey even sweeter.
Well, it is a good book. I thought you were a boss before, like just knowing who you were, a woman of color, and the title CMO. And then I read it and it was like, I got to see behind the CMO, and it's a good read for anybody, especially you women in sports who are listening. Definitely pick up your copy for sure.
Oh, thank you. I put together a website that kind of has information on that. I have some of my artwork on it. It's melissaproctor.com. And, on Instagram, I hope to kind of share more of my journey. And so, following me on Instagram at Melissa M. Proctor. That's it, and like I said, people are like, so what's your goal? Are you going to be on the New York Times bestseller list? And I was like, my goal was writing it for Marley. So this whole process has been an interesting one, because like people are like, what is your end? And I was like, I'm in it. Like, this is it,
Mm-hmm. Yes, you just want to do dope shit, right?
Yeah, and whatever happens. But, I just appreciate, all the love and support that I've gotten from it. And the response from people who've read it has been amazing to me, things that I didn't even think of. I'm like, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, let me think about that. And people are like, so when is the next book? I'm like, time out. Slow down. It's like 20, technical. There is so much more that I still need to live, but, never say never.
Right. Exactly. All right. Let's end it with, tell us the best piece of advice that you've ever received.
Best piece of advice I've ever received. I'll probably say, take it all the way back from my mom. It's the same advice I give my daughter every day. And it sounds really cornball, but I take it to heart and I live it. And it's to always do your best in any context, any situation, in leading and work, because as long as you do your best, you can't do any more. And you can leave it right there and walk away. And there have been times where I know I haven't done my best in something and then it didn't work out. And I'm like, regret, shoulda, coulda, woulda, if I only. And so from that, I've gone into every situation saying, you know what? If it's a relationship, if it's work, I will give it 100. And if it doesn't work out, I can walk away from that and feel completely at peace because I know I've given it my all.
Yes, that is good advice. All right. We talked about a lot of stuff. This was amazing. If someone wanted to get in contact with you, how would they do it?
I would ask them to follow me on Instagram. I now have a public Instagram for the first time. My private one is all pictures of my daughter, so it's like my own photo album. But yeah, either IG, Instagram, Melissa M. Proctor, or LinkedIn, but I think Instagram is way more fun and personable. And, that's it. That's it. I'm on this journey. And thank you for having me. And I love what you're doing for women in sports as well. It's so important.
So, well, thank you. We appreciate your time and spending this hour with us and sharing your journey. So thank you so much. So what did you think of this episode? Do you know another woman who works or is aspiring to work in sports? Would you do me a favor and share this with them? It would mean so much if together we could support and inspire other women on their journey. And let's stay connected. I love meeting and talking to new people. Follow me on Instagram at Jahaan Blake and join the free Game of Her Own community by visiting jahaanblake.com. I can't wait to meet you.